Advisory Board. We are waiting on one board member, but we already have a quorum, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So agenda item A is call roll. Brian Morris, presiding officer, and present. Scott Anderson is absent. Nancy Crumley.
Here.
Grayson Gill.
Here.
John McGraw.
Here.
Lawrence Taylor.
Here.
Jerry Matheny. Okay. Greg Tomas.
Here.
And Nancy Crowther.
Here.
Thank you. All right. That was item B on the agenda. Item C, approval of minutes. I assume the board members have a few minutes to read through the minutes from our last meeting of January 18th. Are there any comments or changes? Okay. Someone would like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second?
I'll
Greg
second
Temez,
it.
second.
Okay, who seconded?
Greg Temez.
Okay. Great. All in favor?
Aye.
So approved. Item D, public comments. I wasn't handed any public comment papers, so I assume we have no comments from the public. All right. Item E, staff reports. Oh, I'm sorry, while the staff is coming forward, I'd like to recognize one of our commissioners that's here, Commissioner Wesson. I appreciate you coming to advisory board. Hopefully we don't do bad and you have to slap our hands, but again, we appreciate you being here and the commission's interest in what we try to do here.
Well, anyway, I appreciate all y'all's service too. Thank you.
Good morning, Tarsha Red, manager with the licensing division for elevator program. Looking at the report you have before you, as you can see, there's been a slight decrease in the number of responsible party designees as opposed to the contractors and inspectors, and that's probably likely to contractors being able to use the same designee, so we don't need as many registered. Moving to the equipment. When we look at the active equipment versus the certificates issued, you'll see that there's a difference in the numbers. And usually what happens is there's equipment that's taken out of service, either decommissioned or removed from service after the certificate is issued. And you can see that continuously happens from fiscal year to fiscal year. In 2016, we had over 41,000 active pieces of equipment with 48,700 certificates issued. Again, in 2017, 43,000 active pieces of equipment with 50,000 certificates issued. And we're on trend to have the same thing to happen in fiscal year 2018. And again, that's primarily because you have equipment that's either decommissioned or removed from service after the certificate has been issued. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next staff report would be Customer Service Division.
Good morning, board members. My name is Trey Seals, Director of Customer Service Division. I will be making the report today on behalf of my manager who is out of the office today. So for statistic on emails and phone calls, you'll see per your report that we're hovering around 8 to 1,000 contacts per month, and they're pretty evenly distributed between phone calls and emails. Most of the contacts are regarding folks trying to get oriented on the website, elevator fee calculators, questions about reports and statuses, so those kinds of inquiries. So if we can look it up, we do. If we need to, we transfer it on to Jim in our RPM division or to our licensing division, who you just heard from just a minute ago. That concludes my report this time. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Brian Morris, I guess let me have a reminder to the board. Since this broadcast is on the internet and Delia needs to do minutes, we need to announce our names or who we are as we begin to speak. It helps everybody on YouTube, and it helps Delia know what to put in the meeting minutes. So again, Brian Morris, I have a question. So most of these calls and emails, are they from contractors, inspectors, or
Usually-
building owners?
Owners, typically, for us, mainly owners. Managers change for the property, and a new person is in, and they need to, get oriented again, or to figure out where that invoice is, or whatever the question might be.
Okay. Then I would assume if a contractor probably has a question, they know Jim directly, and they may just go directly to a phone call or email to Jim.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
New member on the board, this is Nancy Crowther.
Hi.
In regards to customer service, are any of these where people have been stuck in elevators from malfunctions or have concerns due to access?
Right. We do, from time to time, have occasional calls, and we do have a process, but I do not have a notification that we've had that kind of specific call since the last meeting.
And how do people know to call you?
Usually from the website, on the decal on the elevator, but yeah, usually those two locations.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Any other board questions? All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next staff report is Enforcement Division.
Good morning. My name is Robin Glassner, and I am a prosecutor in the Enforcement Division. If you look at your report from Enforcement, there's a couple of case highlights, which is how we normally do our report. And I'm not going to go through these one by one. Let me just give you a brief summary. The first four were all initiated based on a process that enforcement does. There's a report that's run on elevators that have not been inspected timely, and then we go ahead and investigate, and if they are in fact out of the date that they're supposed to be for their inspection, then we open a case. So the first four were all open because of that process. And then the fifth one was open because of a complaint that was filed by a member of the public. But they all have to do with the same issue. Elevators weren't inspected. And again, like, these cases will come from agreed orders that first, all of the cases that we had on our report were from agreed orders, so both parties agreed to settle. There wasn't any defaults in the time period for this advisory board meeting, so that's always a really good thing. You will notice that in the case summaries, the penalty will start out at a higher amount, but the amount actually agreed to for the agreed order is going to be lower because the respondent came into compliance, and that's something that enforcement's always working towards, is getting somebody to come into compliance. For your program, they come into compliance, and that's done by getting the inspection done and then paying the fees and the fines if there are any. If they were to not come into compliance, then sometimes we do have to move for an emergency order, but that would be done under a different process. We normally don't get those. So if you're looking for those kinds of things in your report, they rarely happen. Are there any questions regarding the summary?
Hi, it's Nancy Crumley. I do have a question for you. On the key statistics, the number of cases opened.
Yeah,
fiscal year?
that's going to be in my second part.
Oh, sorry
Yeah.
about that.
Sorry,
Go on.
I know ours is kind of longer, so, and I know there's a lot of, that has to do with the case summary, so I was going to do the key statistics in just a second.
Sure.
Okay,
Okay,
there's no,
Yeah, Brian Morris, I have a question. So where does the money go? The
Uh,
money
the-
that's collected?
so money that's collected from fines that come to enforcement because of orders, those all go to the Texas General Fund. That's purely if it was collected in the enforcement process.
Mhm.
There are some fees or late fees, stuff like that, that stay with the agency. It just depends upon what it's line noted as. Because there's a different, like, enforcement takes a different process than licensing.
Okay. Brian Morris, I have another question. So it seems like through these case studies that it's basically a $2,000 penalty for per unit of not being in compliance. Is there an actual written policy as the settlement case? Is it a sliding scale? Is it arbitrary? Is it the guy was nice, so we're softer on him, he was hard, and so we're doubling the fine?
No, I mean, we always keep it pretty much the same. We start off at a 75% original settlement, and then once, at least for the elevator program, so if we were to start out with a unit that had never been inspected or hadn't been inspected timely, it's a Class C violation, which is a $2,000 penalty. Once they come into compliance and they file the reports and they get all the late fees submitted if they need to, then in the elevator program it changes to a Class B, which is a $1,000 penalty, which we would then offer another settlement. So we're essentially like restarting our process when they come into compliance, which they pretty much always do in this program. So it's on a determined scale, and pretty much all prosecutors follow the same, so that everybody's treated the same.
Mary Winston, TDLR. Robin, thank you for your questions, and I just want to make sure, because I'm wondering if you're trying to get to the fact that we have a penalty matrix.
No.
Okay,
We're
so
not supposed to?
do we know that we
Mary, yes, it
have a
was.
penalty matrix? So, and if you want to kind of give them, because the advisory boards at a certain point provide their expertise in developing that, and Robin has done a great job of telling you what the process is, not to punish someone, but so if they come into compliance, and we do offer settlements that lower the penalty, but we do start off with each program has a penalty matrix, so I'll let Robin go with that one.
So each program has a penalty matrix that's done agreed upon by the advisory board and enforcement, and then the commission blesses it. That's all posted on our website. It's under they're called enforcement plans is the tab, which there's not a direct link to it, but I know where it is on my computer. It's not going to be like right when you pull up the website. It's under I think it's under not orders. It's on one of the top tabs and it talks about the commission. I think it's the first one on it. And then you have to click through a little bit, but you will get to where it has all the penalty matrices laid out. And basically, anytime we're looking over those, enforcement always works with the advisory board and moves forward with a plan on how much each level should be and where each penalty should fall in that matrix. So it's by level of importance. So like a Class A would be considered a lower level of importance, like something that's not as detrimental to the public and would have a lower fine, as opposed to something that's like a Class C or a Class D. Some programs go up to a Class H. I believe this program goes up to a D. So it just depends upon what the violation is, but those amounts are the amounts that we start with every time. So we wouldn't, and this program in particular has a set amount for each violation, whereas other programs have ranges. So it would be, if it's a Class C, it would start out at $2,000 per violation. And then depending upon how many years they're out of compliance would be how many violations we charge, or how many pieces of equipment are out of their time period is how many violations we would charge.
Robin, if I can, Carla James, TDLR, we will get you links to those the penalty matrix for your board so that you can see exactly what she's talking about.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions on the case highlights?
Yes, Grayson Gill, I've got one. So, Robin, the penalties assessed was about 71,000. The collected was 51. So there's a gap of about 20,000 in there. Can you comment on what that AR looks like?
So the statistics that we're showing now are for like so my cases that get pulled are from the last advisory board to this advisory board, but the statistics are from financial when our financial year starts, which is September 1st. So there might be a discrepancy between people who are on payment plans, default orders that were entered earlier in the fiscal year that we're still waiting for that payment plan to be collected on. That's normally what calls for in the statistics. And I can go through the statistics real quick too. Let me move on to that real quick. So again, like the statistics that are on here are going to start September 1st until they go, this particular one is going to go through February 2018 because that's how our fiscal year is based. So one thing I wanted to point out was the number of cases opened in the whole fiscal period between that time period is 102. And the number of cases that we've been able to resolve are 102. But that doesn't mean that we don't have active elevator cases right now. It just means for this time period, which I don't think this happens that often, we've managed to equal our input and output for closing. But we are constantly working elevator cases. We have reports that get run all the time to let us know what equipment is out of compliance so that we can start initiating cases if we need to, so that the public is not going to be at risk if a piece of equipment is out of compliance. And as far as like the penalty payment goes, this is actually a higher rate of success for us getting penalties. It's actually at like 71.72%. That's really good for us as far as collections go, because we are constantly in payment plans, sometimes getting respondents to come into compliance. We offer a payment plan so that someone doesn't feel like they have to pay everything right then and they can't, or they have to take out a loan or something like that. We try and work with them to make it easier so that they're able to come in compliance and then pay the fine, and hopefully we don't see them again. Any questions? Any other questions? Yeah.
Nancy, I do. Nancy Crumley. So on the list that you're talking about that's run for units out of compliance,
Mhm.
what's the parameter for being out of compliance? At what point does it hit that list?
We are not the department that runs it. I believe it might be either 2 months or 3 months, because
Okay.
they get sent a first letter that's kind of an audit. These are automated letters that say you're about to be out of compliance. I think one gets sent 30 days before if they haven't submitted their reports, and I think one gets sent again 30 days after, and then I think we give them a grace period just in case mail or disaster happens, so that way we can give them some time, and then we start looking at it to see whether or not we need to open up a case.
And the second part of the question is that, so when it makes the list, is a case opened on 100% of those?
That I'm not sure about, because
Units.
it's not my legal assistant that does those cases, so I'm not 100% sure on that. I think it just depends on what the circumstances are and whether or not any investigation can be done on them before we open it. Because we have limited resources at the same time.
Right.
And we have 2 legal assistants that are dedicated to looking into elevator cases, but they also work another program. So it's trying to see the balance between whether or not we think we need to open a case or not.
Okay, thanks.
John McGraw, I would assume that you don't open it on 100%, because I get the first letter on almost every one of our properties, almost every year.
And that's normally what it
Yeah.
comes, because normally sometimes that report gets ran and maybe licensing got slammed and the reports are sitting with licensing, and sometimes we can chase those down pretty easily, and sometimes it's just a paperwork buildup. But we try our hardest to work with licensing. Surely if we filed a case and licensing had the report, but for some reason they just got swamped or overworked and they couldn't get to it right away, then we would pull the case back.
There shouldn't be
dismiss
any
it.
doubt you're not in compliance. Like I say, I'm always on time getting mine, and I still get the first letter
Yeah.
almost every time.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So this is Lawrence Taylor. for these locations that are on a payment plan, what do we do if they don't pay? What actions do we take against them?
We have one legal assistant right now that's dedicated to getting all the payments in. For the elevator program, I haven't really heard of a whole lot of elevators that haven't paid fully on the payment plan. For other if it's for other licenses, we do have the authority to revoke if someone doesn't pay on an order. But if it's a building owner, it works differently because it's not really a license; it's just a compliance certificate. So we send out various letters, but as far as if somebody doesn't pay and it's a building owner, not 100% sure what happens there. But there's none that I know of that have defaulted.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
More questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next staff report would be Education and Examination Division.
Good morning, Board. My name is Lorraine Srofe, and I am with the Education and Examination Division. As you will see, we provided the statistics report for you. Just as a reminder, E&E only is involved with your industry as far as continuing education for the responsible parties. We have the fiscal years 2018, 17, and 16 provided there for you. These are showing the approved courses and all of our CE providers. You will notice that it has zeros for courses that have been approved so far this year, but that was only up until February, so we've already done 3 more courses added to that. And after you review that, if you have any questions, I would be glad to answer them for you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Ms. Nancy Crowther, are these mandatory?
The courses?
Yes.
Yes, for the responsible parties, they are required to complete continuing education with an approved provider, and the course also has to be approved through the department.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No more questions? All right.
All right,
Thank you very
thank
much.
you.
The next staff report is Regulatory Program Management.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and advisory board members. I'm Jim Renan, Chief Elevator Inspector. And my report today, the staff report for RPM/elevators is going to be a little bit of a short one since we met not too long ago. So in your report, you will notice on the first page, we split it. Is the 2018 reports on plan reviews, waivers, delays, and the Hurricane Harvey figures. And I also have a couple amendments that I'll go over during my report. Second topic is actually meant for item G on the agenda, which is the discussion on the adoption of the latest edition of the elevator code. So on your third page for fiscal year 2018, what you're showing is the totals of plan reviews for alterations and new construction for each month. The waivers and delays, we only had one for March, but as you can see in the totals for each month there. And then the third column is the Hurricane Harvey figures. You show the plan review totals for September through March and removed from service. That's the one edit I'd like to tell you about. So 16, I believe, was the same number we reported at the last advisory board. That has gone up substantially. It just so happens that all of the inspection reports for removed from service came in after we did our report. So that's why I'm doing an oral amendment, and they're sitting at about 25 right now. And like I reported the last time, they will, I look for them to go up a whole bunch more, because we're still getting reports every week from buildings that were damaged in the Houston area and outlying areas by Hurricane Harvey. The other edit is, and we didn't put it in our report, was we approved 2 new variances last week. 18-01 is on access stair, and it's actually a vertical platform lift that has a telescoping staircase that covers the lift. So think of a stage in a high school where they need to meet the ADA requirements. It's a really neat unit. The problem is 18.1 does not address this type of a combo piece of equipment. So the manufacturer had to get us the information for the testing and maintenance procedures on the staircase portion. And once they got us that, we approved that variance. The second variance, 18-02, is, and it was submitted by ThyssenKrupp Elevator, and it is on their belt suspension, which we already have 3 other manufacturers that are doing that, so that was a pretty easy one. And before I forget, I'd like to welcome our newest advisory board member, and is it Crothers? Crowther, Ms. Crowther. So I wanted to answer your question that you asked Tarsha about. So yes, we do get calls. Most of it is email, but I do get phone calls dispatched to my office from customer service, usually after the fact of a person being stuck in an elevator, and then they go into the story of how the elevator is constantly not in operation. This is a huge concern of my department, although under our jurisdiction, we don't enforce ADA. So in most cases, I will put those people in touch with the local fire marshal or building inspector who addresses those concerns. In the meantime, we make the phone calls to find out who's maintaining the equipment, and then usually call that licensed contractor, and we can usually get the service stepped up and the problem solved. All righty. And that's my report for today, if anybody has any questions. Yes?
Hey, Jim, this is Lawrence Taylor. When you were talking about the Hurricane Harvey figures and you had that 25, is that 25 in addition to the 16 that's here already?
No,
Or
that's
total
total
25?
right now, as far as removed from service. There are, just to let you know, we've been having to do a lot of education. And I'm just gonna say it's naiveness. A bunch of the owners don't know. They think that because they shut their elevator off, they're in compliance. But that is not, or does not fit a category recognized by the state of Texas. It has to be officially removed from service. And once we explain that, it's taken care of. Yes, Nancy, Ms. Crumley.
Nancy Crumley, to that point, is removed from service outside of Hurricane Harvey a stat you can start listing on here?
Yes, oh, yeah.
Along with the,
So you would like the totals of all elevators within the state that have been removed from service? Yeah, we can take care of
I think
that.
it's a growing trend.
Oh, no doubt about it. And while we're at it, if we're gonna report that, we can also report the units that have been brought back into service or returned to service. Because I think those numbers will surprise you.
Right, thank you.
Okay? Anything?
Yeah, John McGraw, is it your assumption that the majority of these 25 elevators are related to storm damage?
When Hurricane Harvey hit, TDLR met, and we tried to devise a plan with my department to make this as easy as possible for the owners, because they're worried about getting their buildings back in service. So we have waived the fee. It's a $20 fee, the same as an annual inspection to remove from service. As long as the inspector documents in the comment section that it's Hurricane Harvey related, that comes straight to my office. So it bypasses licensing, just so we can get it into the ELBI file and imaged and all that, and they pay nothing for that.
Okay.
And we're also doing that on plan reviews also for expedited.
Oh, okay.
So if an owner has to do alterations to their equipment due to Hurricane Harvey damage, we waive the $1,000 per unit expedited, but still treat it as an expedited.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
No more questions?
All right, thank you. That's my report.
All right, and the final staff report would be executive office.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman and advisory board members, I'm Nick Voinis, TDLR Chief of Staff. Thanks again for being here today, and thank you for your service. Here to bring you our executive office report, a little summary of what's going on around the agency today. We received some good news recently when Governor Abbott announced his appointment of 2 new commissioners to our board for terms that expire in 2023. So our board is back at full strength. You met Dr. Wesson earlier, and he is one of our new members. He's a retired orthodontist living in Bastrop. And we also added Dr. Ray Callis, who's a physician anesthesiologist from Beaumont. And to our 7-member commission, we have additional biographical information on our website, and the commission will next meet on Thursday, May the 24th. We're in the process of completing our strategic planning exercise. This is something that the legislature mandates all state agencies do every 2 years, and it's something that we take very seriously. 2 years ago, we identified 56 strategic initiatives to address during last year's legislative session, and after all was said and done, we had 52 of them that were passed into law. Want to stress that all of our constituents had a voice in the process, anywhere from licensees, consumers, advisory board members, industry reps, and so on, and all of them were encouraged to participate. We hosted external sessions with the public in Arlington, El Paso, Houston, McAllen, and Austin. And for those who were unable to make any of the sessions in person, we posted survey questions on our Facebook page and our web page, so they too may participate. These sessions were an opportunity for everyone to share ideas and opinions on how we're doing and how we can improve. We also conducted internal staff sessions throughout the agency during the months of March and April. We're in the process of compiling all the comments and ideas and drafting the final report, and it will be turned in during the early part of June. I also like to talk to you a little bit about your website. You know, I like to update you periodically on your traffic numbers, and your numbers are good. For the 6-month period that ended last night, the elevator and escalator safety website had a little more than 22,000 page views, so that's an average of 122 per day. Folks that accessed your site, 71% did so from a desktop computer, 24% did so from a smartphone, and 5% from a tablet. The top reasons for visiting the site were FAQs, number 1, followed by forms and applications. Third was laws, followed by rules, and license search. We also, in addition to our web presence, are active on social media, and want to remind you of our Facebook and our Twitter accounts to help you keep up with TDLR news and activities. We also have a group of about 4,000 subscribers that receive various email blasts pertaining to your program, and if anyone is not receiving those and would like to, simply just go to the website and subscribe there. Be glad to answer any questions.
Questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Item F on the agenda, discuss and possible recommendation regarding proposed rule amendments to 16 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 74, 74.50, and 74.60, to implement the 2016 audit recommendation to update the rules to reflect what is currently in practice regarding certificate information and to correct an outdated reference. This agenda item includes discussion of any public comments received on the proposed rule amendments.
Good morning. I'm Molly Fudel, Assistant General Counsel. These rule amendments were published in the Texas Register on February 16th, and in those 30 days of the public comment period, we received 0 public comments. These rule amendments are very non-controversial. The amendment to 74.50 corrects a cross-reference, and the amendment to 74.60 just has been changed to accurately reflect what's already on the certificate of compliance. I can answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, staff would recommend voting to recommend sending these rule amendments to the commission.
Okay, Molly, thank you. Any comments or questions from the board? All right, so do we have a motion to approve the recommendation?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have a second?
Second. John McGraw.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? None. It's okay? So that
One
passes.
abstention, Nancy Crowther.
Yes, ma'am? Okay. Oh, thank you. All right. Item G, discussion and possible recommendation regarding proposed rule amendments to 16 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 74, 74.100. Proposed amendments, update references, add ASME A 17.1 code changes, and renumbering accordingly.
Molly Fudel, Assistant General Counsel again. So these are the rules. These have not been published in the Texas Register. They're still in the review period, and we're bringing them here to you for discussion today. We, as you can see in 74.100, what we have written up is a code change in subsection A from the A 17.1 2007 to the 2016 edition. Jim Renan has joined me, and I think he's going to talk more about the real-world implications of what that means.
Good morning once again, advisory board members. My name's Jim Renan, Chief Elevator Inspector. So this was I'll put it, a very interesting and long procedure. This jump usually is on a 3-year cycle, and we are going from 2007 to 2016, which is a huge jump. To reiterate why we're having to do that is for high-rise installations, which these are requirements that come out of the building code. There was an addition after the World Trade Towers. The code committees significantly changed the way we look at fire service operation in high-rise installations. So we've had the additional requirements for fire access elevators, which are buildings over 120 feet, and OEO, which is occupant evacuation operation, and that's probably the largest change. What you're going to see in office towers in any city within the United States is the signs used to say, in case of fire, please use the stairways. Now you're going to actually see a computer display board there. And if it's a high-rise building and the building goes into OEO operation, that display, once you hit the hall button, will now tell you next elevator will arrive in 5 seconds, 2 seconds, whatever that time limit's going to be. The code committee realized that if the elevators would have stayed operational in the World Trade Tower and not responded to the designated landing like we're used to, that a whole lot more people would have probably made it out of those towers. So that's the trend now. Buildings don't have to go that route under the building code. And my memory's getting fuzzy. That's why I like to have my books. I believe OEO is 420? Yeah, 420. So they either have to install a additional staircase as another form of egress out of the building, or they can do OEO on the elevators. So what happened, the state of Texas being under the 2007 code, none of those requirements is in the code that's adopted by the state of Texas. So we could not turn a blind eye to these requirements. So that's the whole reason for trying to do this adoption. What I'm going to go over is the major differences, and it's only a page and a half long. There were actually, by my count, 282 requirement changes from the 7 edition to the 2016 edition. Thank God most of these were editorial. Thank God. I think there is a lot of good stuff in this code for the building owners especially. I think it gives them a whole lot more protection. It makes their contract between their maintenance supplier more binding because now some of that language is in the code. So we will have, and what I would like to do is the same deletions that currently exist in the rules at 74-100 will stay. There is 1 or 2 of them that need to be moved, or we struck them and then came up with new ones because the section in the 2007 code, they're now in a different section in the 216. So if you have that paperwork that I compiled, so we're going to keep all the same codes we have. The only change in 74-100A will be the addition. It'll change from 2007 to 2016. In parentheses B are the amendments that we need to make to the existing deletions. This is what you wanted me to go on. Okay, I just want to make sure. So we want to delete all the references to A17.7. And the reason for this is this TDLR, Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, has a very good process for new technology variances where it leaves that up to the department to decide whether something new, something outside the scope of the code is going to be good for the state of Texas, and we'd like to continue with that process. Number 2, under parentheses B, is section 2.12.7.2.1C. And what I'd like to do here is delete the requirement for the hoistway access switches. And what those are for the elevator mechanics when they need to gain access to the elevator hoistway and get on top of the elevator. Usually in the entrance assembly, in the jamb, the hoistway door jamb is a key switch, and that's what he uses to key the elevator up or down. Well, they have now given permission to allow the installers to move this key switch to the sight guard. So now the switch itself is going to be on a movable part of the elevator system, the hoistway doors. And I think that's the wrong way to go. I think it's dangerous. One, we're placing any worker that does any type of work on an elevator system, his hands, his body, or you're just putting it that much closer to a moving part where you are at least a foot, sometimes even further away when you were keying that elevator. I don't think there'd be a big problem as far as electrical safety on new installations because the advancements in technology, we now monitor those electrical lines. So what I'm afraid of is if we allow it at all, we're going to allow it on all, and on alterations on older units, if that key switch is now in the sight guard, which your sight guard, all it is the metal piece attached to the hoistway door to fill the void spot. That's gonna be fed by a cable, so it's gonna actually be a traveling cable. And after so many uses and bending in the same place, there's a good chance that cable can short. And on an older elevator system, if that's shorted, once the elevator mechanic puts the elevator on inspection while he's standing in the elevator, it's gonna take off, either in the up or down direction. And if he's standing where he shouldn't be, we're gonna have a serious injury or a death. So I don't think that's too much to ask. All we're asking is that the installers keep installing it either in the jamb or in the wall itself and not put it on the sight guard. Number 3 is delete section 7.4.2.2 and all references to type B material lifts within the adopted standard, preface, and appendices. This is not anything new. We've been doing this in the state of Texas since I've got here anyway. And I know our previous chief wasn't allowing it. Material lifts are not regulated equipment. If we go ahead with this adoption, I saw an opening where we could get this actually put down in writing, and we're seeing these starting to pop up. I've had two instances, and they came in on a plan review. If you go to our definitions, and I'm going to paraphrase here, for related equipment, it basically says any device that transports a person. So that's an elevator. A type B material lift is a material lift which is allowed to have a rider or operator. And according to our definitions, that would be an elevator. So the reason we're starting to see them pop up now is if you give an owner a choice between paying for a full-blown freight elevator or a type B material lift, the answer to that is going to be easy, and he's going to endanger his employees. They're out there, but right now they're in exempt facilities, industrial facilities. That's where we used to see these. We have type A material lifts all over the state, but those are not allowed to have a rider or operator. They're only allowed, you put your material on it, you run the device from outside up to your second floor or down to your basement, and then you take the stairs down there and unload the freight. And we'd like to keep it, I'd like to keep it that way. I think it's the safe way to go. 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are just deletions because we do not do, our third-party inspectors do not test the standby or emergency power operation of elevators. And that was started years ago because of the scheduling problems out in our rural areas. So that is done by the fire marshal or fire inspector, and we'd like to keep it that way. If we had that inserted into the adoption of this new code, I think we're gonna see a really big problem, especially out in the rural areas of West Texas, trying to get an additional person out at that job the same day when the licensed contractor and the elevator inspector out there. So you're gonna have a lot of delays in your annual inspections and a lot of late inspections. And then delete Appendix E in its entirety. That's our ADA requirements, and that's because we do not enforce that. So some states do. Texas, at this point, does not. The effective dates.
I can talk a little bit about
Okay,
that.
yeah, because I need some water, please.
And I know from watching the video of the last advisory board, there was a sense of urgency in getting this code through. So there might be a little bit of surprise when you see the effective date that we've put on here of June 1st. I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So the quickest that we could make these rules effective, keeping in mind they haven't been published in the Texas Register and the 30-day comment period hasn't gone up, the absolute earliest would be, you're looking at September about. And then After that, you want to give the public notice that the code is changing. So in the past, what we did when 2007 code was effective, I believe we gave 6 months, 6 or 7 months of notice that effective 6 months from now, the code will be changing. So if you're looking from September, that's about March, April of 2019 that it would actually go into effect. And that puts us square in the middle of legislative session. And because that is such a time of change, we wanted to make it just after the session ends, hence June 1st.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Needless to say, I'm opposed to that, because every building owner and every elevator purchaser in the state of Texas is paying extra to get a 2007 elevator. So for another year, over a year now, from this, if this goes through this way, every building owner, every person who has their elevator altered is paying extra to comply with this old code, because you have to pull it off the line, you got to put the different software in it, and it's costing the owners money. And I would like to think that there was a more expeditious way to get all these safety improvements that Jim has rightly and correctly mentioned, and quit charging these building owners extra money for outdated code stuff. It just doesn't seem right to me, personally.
Brian Morris, I guess, Lawrence, let's maybe go through this in 2 parts. Let's talk about the deletions and changes that staff has recommended to the adoption of the code. So through the list that Jim's gone over, is there any comments or discussions or disagreements or retractions from the staff recommendation of the changes? Yes, ma'am.
Chairman, this is Nancy Crowther. I respect the fact that the state of Texas has declined to apply the ADA to a lot of our issues here in the state. However, doesn't the Texas accessibility standards have the mirror regulations required in this avenue?
Yes, you're correct. The Texas accessibility standards are enforced by TDLR in the architectural barriers program. They have their own set of rules, which is completely separate from the elevator rules. So that's why we don't include that as part of these rules adoptions.
I have a problem with that because elevators generally are a means of access.
Yeah, it's I don't know how to explain it. It's a legal thing in terms of these rules are adopted under the authority of the elevator statute, not under the authority of the architectural barriers statute. So that's why they have their own separate rules, and they continue to remain in force and effect regardless of these rules.
Ms. Crowther, this is David Gonzalez, former Architectural Barriers Program Manager and the Director of RPM Division. If I can elaborate just a little bit, Molly is correct. 2 separate programs. We still do enforce the architectural barriers accessibility requirements under that Texas Architectural Barriers Act. Those technical requirements are completely different and separate than the ASME requirements we're talking about here. These have to do with more of the operation and safety. So your concerns, although valid, are appropriate for the other program. This is actually addressing the operational aspects of the ASME requirements, and we're still on track. So if you wanted to talk about it afterwards, I'll be glad to elaborate just a little bit more if you need to.
Thank you.
No problem.
I would think then that it would be appropriate to strike that last line of remark in the requirements under the ADA.
Jim Renan, Chief Elevator Inspector again. Yeah, I definitely see your point, and I have a bad habit of when I mean my department or division, I always say we, as it means or the whole state. David is exactly right. I mean, that's handled by architectural barriers, but it's not handled by RPM/elevators division.
This is David Gonzalez again, and once again, we do enforce the accessibility requirements. In fact, we've had a program even preceding the ADA, but we do not enforce the federal requirements. We enforce the Texas Architectural Barriers Act. Again, clarifications and your points are well taken. I think we're on track, though, with what we've got proposed today.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is Lawrence Taylor here. in a further explanation of what is in Article E, that is not ADA. That is the A117.1, which is in the building code. ADA still applies, but there are conflicts between the Texas accessibility standards and what is in Appendix E.
Right.
And an appendix is just a not enforceable item in the first place, because appendix are for information only, and by deleting what you've done here, it makes it clear that this doesn't apply, that Texas accessibility standards apply, and ADA still applies, because that's federal civil rights legislation.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Clarification, Brian Morris. So if I understand it, all new construction, all new building elevators, as far as the location of the buttons and the braille and that stuff, that's reviewed and cleared and checked by Texas accessibility standards.
Correct.
So all new elevator, all new installations would be current with current enforced standards.
Correct.
Existing elevators that have been in place since 1993, as long as they have not been rebuilt or refurbished, they're going to be in compliance with the 93 code or 6 or 7, whatever the time they were put in.
Correct.
Okay.
And just so that maybe this will help on some of your questions. So what I went over a few minutes ago, right before Molly spoke, was basically our technical additions and revisions in our rules to 74-100. I've got a breakdown, and you should have that paperwork in front of you, of the major changes to the code itself that I was going to go over real quick.
We did not receive that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can get you all a copy of it. I'm sorry. What I did was break it down section by section. As I said, there were 282 changes, 47 new additions compared to the 2007 versus the 2016, and 8 deletions. So when I say deletions, that means they struck a whole requirement. On the definitions, which this is very important to me because that's what the whole code is based off of the definitions. If you don't know and aren't clear with the definitions of their verbiage, you're not going to understand the requirement or which direction they're actually trying to go with that requirement. So noteworthy new definitions was elastomeric buffers. Right now, to do that in the state of Texas, you have to go through our new technology variance process. We do have a couple of those on file. There are a couple of manufacturers doing that. And I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but the easiest way to explain it is basically a throwaway buffer. It's kind of like a one-time shot. I've only seen them one time, so I really don't have an opinion one way or another. It looks okay. The code did extensive testing. UL's done testing, so it's definitely going to work. And then they came up with a definition, sound engineering practice. And what that's going to apply to is if something new comes up, especially dealing with an NTV. But when you get into electronic devices, SIL ratings and stuff like that, all that's got to be tested. The code explains that out, so they wanted to expand and put a definite concrete definition in the 16 code of what a sound engineering practice is. Revised was your unlocking zone. They've shortened the unlocking zone. That has to do with your door restrictors on a passenger elevator. And a door restrictor, if you get stuck in an elevator, years ago you could self-rescue and climb out. You can't do that anymore. That code committee has said that's the safest place to be. So they've expanded on the unlocking zone. They also, and once again I'm going on my memory, placed it in a different area. Yeah, I think they went from 212 to
214.
214, yes. Okay, so in section 2, there were about 8 major changes. Section 2.7.3.13 They added new language to access to the machine room. To and from other areas are not permitted. So the code had limited verbiage in our 2007 edition. The interpretation is you can't use the elevator equipment room to get or go to another part of the building. It's got to be separated. They expanded on that and made it more clear. So when you read it now, there's less questions. The new term in section 2.7.6.3.2, accessible to general public. And it's just AGP. That is going to come into play on the MRLs, the machine roomless elevators, where you now have a controller out in an open area, hallway, basically, that is encased in a metal lockable cabinet. And that lockable cabinet now becomes your control room. It's got to have a sticker on there that says AGP. And that's just to let everybody know, caution, you know, and remind the mechanic that if you leave this spot while you're working on it, lock it back up. 2.12.7.2.1C is the access key switch in the sight guard. That's the one that I would like to delete. The new language in 2.12.7.2.2, they have new language for the access switches, how you mount it. It goes into language, if you do the sight guard, it's got to be a sight guard that can withstand the weight of that key switch, because in the past, the old sight guards used to basically be plastic. So you've got to make sure it takes the wear and tear. This was a little bit of a biggie. Section 2.26.2.5, an emergency stop switch on a freight elevator. Used to be the old toggle switch, just like you had on your light switch. It now has to be the push and snap model, the round ones like you used to see on the passenger elevators. They can't have the toggle. They put new verbiage and revised section 2.27.2.4.4, which is your emergency power selection. So that's going to become very important to maintenance engineers in the building and the fire marshals if there's an emergency and the building has no power. This is the one of the ones I really like for building owners, section 2.27.1.1.6. So in the 216 code, they've now put new language and a requirement to monitor the elevator telephone 24/7. There'll be a light out in the hallway, an LED, and if that line, dedicated line, is lost at any time, the light will light, notifying somebody in the building that his phone is out. And just so you know, that's, I'm not going to say it's our number one complaint, but it's pretty close. That somebody has an issue, they push the phone, it doesn't work. So a lot of our phone calls deal with that. Revised in its entirety, 2.27.3.1.6 parentheses C, and this was a big change. The stop switch cannot be overridden on fire service. So what they did a while back is they removed the stop switch in the elevator cab. You might still see them, but it'll be a key switch. But the other stop switches on top of the car, in the pit, some in the machine room, if those are pushed, fire service can no longer override that. And what the code committee said is if it's activated, it was probably done by a mechanic, and there's a good reason it was done, so we shouldn't move this elevator. 2.27.11 is your occupant evacuation elevators. It's a very lengthy section. Revised 2.29.1.1, each piece of equipment in the building now has to be signed an alphabetical or a numeric identification. So they're really trying to enforce that, and it's going to help us out on our inspection form for building designation of equipment. Because a lot of times, if a guy superimposes the TXE number, that other category, the building ID, is what straightens it out for us. So that was it in section 2. Section 3, and this, the biggie was the elastomeric buffers. That's also in section 2, but I figured that was the only big change in section 3, which is hydraulic elevators, so I wanted to give it one change, so I put the elastomeric buffers in there instead of 2. Section 5.2, which are your Lula elevators, no more collapsible doors or folding gates. They have to have a solid door. So that's kind of a biggie. Section 6, which is your escalators. They have a new section 6.1.6.7, which is your escalator braking distance monitor. So they now have to monitor the brake of that escalator every minute that the equipment's on and make sure that that circuit is functioning properly. It's a good addition. We're going to move to section 8, which is 8.3.12, which is where all your engineering tests are for the equipment. They have a new section now for whatever means the manufacturer is using for suspension, your cables. They now have new language on how to do those tests, and it's more involved. New section in 8.3.13, and that's the new testing requirements for the elastomeric buffers. Now, I said earlier about more protection for the owners. We're going to get into 8.6, which is maintenance and repair, and this is huge. And if I'm going to be honest with you, if I saw any controversy, I could see it here because it's going to require, and it's section 8.6.4, 8.6.1.2, general maintenance requirements, which is your maintenance control program. So right now, the contractors we are allowing them to keep this information electronically for the ease of it, even though that's a violation of the rules, section 74.68. And since the rules were done, the state of Texas has required all the pertinent information concerning elevator operation, maintenance, repair, oil logs, has to be kept hard copy on the job. The code has now gone to that direct way. It went, just to give you an idea, it went from a paragraph and a half in the 2007 code to 3 pages in the 216. So there are a lot more stringent requirements going to be put on the licensed contractor. And that information has to stay in the machine room, even if they lose the contract or cancel the contract. The Category 5 test, that's our 5-year test. 125% weight is put on the elevator system every 5 years and tested. That was moved. It used to be in section 8.11 and is now moved to 8.6. And they did the same for electric elevators and hydraulic. Everything is in 8.6 now instead of 8.11. There is a new requirement. Well, I'm going to say it's really revised. They call it new. Right now in the 2007 for escalators, and it's section 8.6.8.15.1, they leave it up to the discretion of the inspector as far as a clean down on the escalator. And it's still that way. They just added more verbiage and made it more clean, more clear that he cited if housekeeping is necessary. This was probably the biggest change, and one of the reasons I was leery about moving to the 216 was section 8.6.11.10, which is your category 5 alternative test methods. And this was a really hard one for me. I'm getting to the point where I'm an old dog, but sometimes I like to learn new tricks. I don't want to be too set in my ways and means to not adopt new and better ways to do things. My opinion used to be you put the 125% weight on the elevator, stress it to its max, and if something breaks, you fix it, and then you go on about your business. So what the manufacturers, there's even private testing companies that have come up with what they call alternative test methods. And I've only witnessed one of them so far. It was right here in Austin, and it was on a ThyssenKrupp job, and I gotta honestly say that I was impressed. It hasn't swayed me all the way where I'm ready to say, yes, I've got to see this a bunch more. But it's definitely opened my mind. You know, with the technology we have today, manufacturers are coming up with just better ways and more accurate ways to measure stuff. So originally, when I first started looking at the 216 edition of the code, I thought, well, if you adopt this, you have to go to alternative test method, or that's a way that the manufacturers or the installers can do this. So, well, what the language says is that alternative test methods can be used when it is approved by the AHJ, and that's the protective language I was looking for. So, just me thinking out loud right now, if we adopt this code, the way I would treat it would be just like a new technology variance. So if XYZ elevator company approached me and said, Jim, we want to do alternative testing, can we do it? Show me all your documents. And then I would get my same committee that I use for NTVs to review the material. If they had to do a presentation, do a presentation. And if everybody says yes, then I feel comfortable enough to go that route. Like I said, I'm keeping an open mind because I don't want to be the old dog that won't learn any new tricks. I mean, it's just something that we're not used to. So they would still do the 125% test at acceptance. What alternative testing does is they come in there, they put a bunch of measuring devices on the cables, they put it on the loadway, and they put one on the cab. So they're actually measuring the amount of slide, slack in the cables, tension on the cables. It's definitely more exact. But instead of doing the 125% 5-year test at the 5th year, they come back in and just get into their elevator, the CPU, the computer, and if the calibrations all line up, they're good to go. They wouldn't put the full or 125% of weight on that elevator system. And the analogy that was told to me, and I've really got to agree with it, it's not unsimilar the way we inspect our vehicles. You know, we go in there, we measure things, make sure the system is working. But for instance, like your brakes on your vehicle, thank God we don't have someone get out on the highway while we're watching them and get their car up to 90 miles an hour and then climb on it to make sure the brakes are going to hold at that speed. We measure the pads, the calipers, all that stuff. That's the best comparison I can give you. So I think we're safe on that one. Alternative testing will be left up to TDLR. No maintainer or licensed contractor will be able to do it unless we give them the heads up on it. Alterations, section 8.7. So section 8.7.2.11.3 parentheses D, they revised that. Well, they actually put new language in it. If an elevator parked, we used to shut the lights off if it had a parking device on it. Now they're not permitted to have to leave the lights on. I haven't really got to the deep root of that one yet, but it is what it is. 8.7.2.21.4, suspension means monitoring and protection, and parentheses D, if monitoring is not present at the time of installation prior to the 2007 code, then they don't need to leave it there, but the language in there right now, whatever's present at the time of the installation stays with the elevator. There was not to get into a big spiel, but there was a legal case took presence at one of our major manufacturers that monitors their suspension means, and there was a judge's decision on that, and that's how it affects our decision. With 216 code, if they have a monitoring device monitoring the suspension means at the time of installation, it stays for the life of the equipment. Section 8.7.6.1.18. Right now, we require a new technology variance for a variable speed escalator. So that goes with green technology. You might have seen them out at the airports. If nobody's riding it, it goes down to slow speed. And it has sensors. If a person approaches, it goes back up to full speed. If we adopt the 216 code, no manufacturer or installer would need to apply for a new technology variance. That's acceptable in the newer edition of the code. And with that, I know I probably missed a couple, but my jaw is starting to get worn out, so I hope that's satisfactory to everybody.
It is. Okay, thank you very much. So I guess what I'd like to do at this point, since we are,
Excuse me, could I ask a question,
yes.
if you don't mind? This is Nancy Crumley. Jim, thank you very much for the time and effort spent on that.
Well,
We appreciate it.
Believe me, it just wasn't me. I rely on a lot of the other chiefs across the United States, and even past ones and ones that eventually might be a chief. So I go to my elevator personnel for knowledge. So there was actually 4 of us that met 3 or 4 times to work on this, because I'll miss, it's human nature, I'll miss something, and that's, more eyes are better at times.
I
So-
did have one question.
Yes.
For some of the new requirements, such as the door restrictor, are any of these affecting existing elevators, or are those going to be exempt from the new code in that regard?
Existing, as you know, we're only asking to adopt the newer version of A17.1. We cannot change the addition on A17.3. That has to go to Texas legislators, so existing equipment stays the same.
Out of the picture.
Unless there is new language in 8.7, which I just went over. The only thing I think they cleared up in 8.7, which I didn't put in my report, it now states, and it's actually 8.6, under repair. So it clears up the gray areas. For instance, on a hydraulic elevator, if you go in and change the tank, pump, valve assembly, it is now considered an alteration. That code spells it out and sends you over to 8.7, and which then sends you to the other applicable sections, what you've got to do. So, we've always gone by the old terminology, like for like. So if you're replacing something with the exact replacement, then it's usually a repair. A good example is a valve. If you lose a valve, we don't have to do, as long as you're going back in with the exact same thing, we don't require a plan review. That still has to be witnessed by an inspector because he has to seal it, but no plan review. Now, some of those things are actually spelled out in 8.6, saying this is not a repair, it is an alteration, but I don't see any major changes there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
John
Yeah.
McGraw, I got one question
Yeah,
for you.
Mr.
On the new fire service requirements, are those going to be applicable to alterations as well, too?
Yeah, it would if
That could be a real nightmare for an existing building.
and that's where it's going to come into play on, for instance, if you have a building, when they remodel, the basic rule, if you remodel 2/3 or more, is from me talking to the inspectors and the fire marshals, then you have to bring them, most of the building up to the current code. So I'm thinking of an older building where if they increase like their ballroom space in like a hotel or something where they might not be able to do that extra staircase, then they're gonna have to do OEO, and yeah, it's, and I've only witnessed the OEO, I was on 2 right here in Austin, same building. It's pretty involved. There's a lot of requirements in there, but I hope I answered your question there.
I was more concerned about just elevator alterations. If
It will tell you, so if you go in 8.7, if it says you must now comply with section 2.27, that's where OEO is. So if you've got it, you've got to meet all those requirements.
that's going to be tough on a lot of owners.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But that's only for excuse me, Nancy Cromley, that's only for 420
Correct.
Yeah.
feet of travel. Okay.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so it's only tall buildings. Yeah.
And this is Lawrence here. I'd like to point out it's not required. It is optional.
Right.
And the stairway wouldn't apply to an existing building.
Correct.
So that wouldn't, OEO is never required.
Well, and that was a question I had was, if the option is a stairwell, but do you have to do the stairwell then if you don't do the OEO?
The stairwell only applies to new construction.
Okay. So you don't necessarily have to do the OEO just because you can't do a stairwell.
No, that's in lieu of the stairwell, so they give you that choice.
Right.
Under the building code.
Well, and that was the question I had is if you can't do the stairwell, do you have to do the OEO?
On like Lawrence was saying, on an existing, I mean, you've only got so much space, so.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hopefully, once again, I hope I might have over outlined it, but I hope I gave you enough information. I know I missed probably a couple, but.
Any other questions of the board? All right, so what I'd like to do is for a motion to accept, or a motion about the staff recommendations excluding the Appendix E item. So I want a motion from the board to approve or disapprove, like I said, everything of the staff recommendations of the deletions except for the Appendix E item. Kind of a motion.
So
Can we hold on a second so we can go back and look at that? 'Cause
Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Or we can get Jared to put it on the screen maybe.
Yeah, so it's about the hoistway access switch, the emergency power, the type B material lift. And delete the reference to A 17.3.
One point of order, and I just noticed this, if you look at Appendix E in the code, and Lawrence, you could probably strike me if I'm wrong here, but it's elevator requirements for persons with physical disabilities in jurisdictions enforced in the NBCC. Well, that's Canada,
That's correct.
so we don't enforce that anyway. So to me, it's just my opinion, it would, whether it's deleted or not, it's kind of a moot point. Am I wrong or am I right?
Well, this is Lawrence. The original reason it was deleted back in the 2007 code was because it confused people when they see it, even though an appendix doesn't apply, period. It's just informational purpose. Can't write a violation of an appendix.
Correct.
Period. And because Texas has its own Texas accessibility standards, and because ADA is a federal civil rights law, there was no need for it, and to avoid the confusion of somebody looking at that, that's the only reason it was deleted. If you left it in there, it would actually not change anything.
Right.
But it's saves 2 phone calls.
Yeah.
I mean, it states right in the introduction that this appendix is not a mandatory part of this code, so whether it's deleted or not really makes no, it's not that it's unimportant, but it just doesn't influence the way I have to do my job.
And Molly Fudel, Assistant General Counsel, I'd like to point out, In the existing deletions in the rules, Appendix E is deleted.
Well, again, Brian Morris, all I'm trying to do, Nancy Crowther, is give you the opportunity, if you're still objecting to the deletion, then I want to give the opportunity to vote on that. If you want to withdraw your objection to deleting that, then I will vote in total. That's my only objective. Having heard the other discussions?
This is Nancy Crowther. I think having heard all the discussion, then I would go ahead and change my opinion in lieu of what I just recommended, so.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay, thank you, Alex. I just want to give you that opportunity. So therefore, do we have a motion of the board to accept in total the staff's recommendations of the deletions?
Mr. Chairman, is that including the effective date?
No,
Okay.
excluding, except for the
Excluding
expected
that,
date.
yeah.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. So everything of the staff recommendation except the acceptance
moved.
date. Okay, we have a motion from Lawrence. We have a second?
Second.
Okay, John, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No opposition. Okay, so now let's go to the last item of the staff recommendation was of the effective date. So I guess, Jim, maybe, again, as more of a non-industry member on the board, how many of or do we know how many states have already adopted the 2016? A lot? I mean, a majority, a lot?
Mr. Taylor might have a better answer since he travels to a lot of those meetings. I'd say about 13.
I was going to say 12.
Okay.
And Iowa goes on it on the 15th of May, so that'll be 13. The others are pending. Chicago is supposed to be going on to it by the end of the year. And it's expected that between now and the end of the year, there'll be like a gold rush of that happening around.
There are, I'm going to say 4 or 5 that I think it's in their statute where it's automatically adopted as soon as it comes out.
Okay. And again, Brian Morris, another question. So if the adoption date was moved forward sooner, is the QEI training adequate, that the inspectors would be ready to go, that the contractors would be ready to go, and that the responsible parties would be ready to go?
Yeah, Jim Renan, Chief Elevator Inspector. The contractors are already there, as Mr. Taylor stated earlier. I mean, all of the equipment is manufactured to the latest edition of the code. So the argument, or the comment I usually get from the manufacturers is it actually costs more money right now to install equipment in Texas because they have to manipulate software. In certain situations, they have to pull actual devices off the elevator to ship to Texas because it's not required under the 2007 edition. The inspectors and responsible parties, there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve there. But the main part is just on those 2 sections, fire access, which are all building code requirements. But we still cite those if they're in violation. The OEO, I'm not going to tell a fib to anybody. That is going to take a little bit of practice for the inspectors because it's very involved. And it's the best thing I can compare it to is the first time I did an actual elevator inspection. It probably took me 2 or 3 times longer than what I could do one right now because I just wasn't used to it. I wasn't keyed in on what to automatically look at, and that's what it's going to take on the OEO. So, yeah, there's going to be a learning curve. How long that's going to be?
Well, again, Brian Morris, but I mean, that only applies to buildings over 120 feet
420 for OEO.
or of elevator travel.
Yeah, fire
so-
access is over 120, and the fire service on fire access works exactly the same as the 2007 edition of the code right now. It's got certain building code requirements that our inspectors are going to look at, but nothing major.
Okay, I would theorize that there are less than a handful of probably buildings planned in the state that are going to be more than 420 feet.
Yes, yes.
John McGraw.
Yes,
Jim.
yeah.
Let me be the devil's advocate here for a minute. What is the downside to us of trying to push this schedule up as soon as is humanly possible? Is there any downside to it?
The
Are we
only.
gonna have somebody come to us and say, gosh, why'd you shove this through? We were,
No, I mean, I think as long as we give time for public comments, so if anybody is in opposition or has a comment that they need to let us know about, I welcome those. So as long as we can get the public comments in, we cure a situation, because
absolutely.
right now, like I said, we've got buildings that
Can't
are
enforce.
high-rises going up. What the inspectors are doing is actually inspecting the complete system, but they're having to look at the requirements if it's an OEO, occupant evacuation operation, out of the 216. And if they cite that requirement, an owner is not, by law, required to fix it, because it's not an adopted code. That requirement doesn't exist in 2007. So we really need those requirements if we do any high-rise inspections.
In that case, I'm kind of with Lawrence. It's like, let's do this as quickly as statutes will allow us
Lawrence
to do.
Taylor again, too. But if you wait till June 2019, the 2019 elevator code will be just about ready to publish.
Right.
We'd be doing this daggone thing again.
Right.
It seems unconscionable to, when you've got all this safety stuff available to be used, and there are 1,187 cities and counties in the sovereign state of Texas, and the vast majority of them are under 2015 IBC, and that creates an unavoidable consequential conflict between what we do now and what you can enforce.
Correct. Absolutely.
Again, Brian Moore, so I think what Molly had said is traditionally, there is a grace period or learning period. But if we look at, I mean, the licensed contractors, there's currently 186, inspectors 160, designees 240. So it's a very small group to get basically notice out or word out. Say, hey, guys, expect this is coming soon. So I think the grace period, again, I'm a registered electrical engineer, and I know every time that the electrical code changes and the building codes change, we do the 6-month period or 3-month period. That does help a whole lot, because there's a lot of extra other moving parts, and the community is very broad. I think the community that we're talking about here between the QEI or the inspectors, contractors, and responsible parties, I think is a small enough group that, I mean, you got all their notifications. I mean, I think it's can be small enough. So I appreciate staff's recommendation, Molly's recommendation to put in that period. But yeah, I'm in agreement too that the time period, that extra 6 months or 8 months, I don't think is necessary for this updated change.
This is not like the big fire service debacle where you had to give people time to comply. You're not asking anybody to comply with anything.
No. Like I said, it really plays no effect on existing equipment unless you're going to alter the equipment. Then it might play a small role.
And also, obviously, legislatively, there's steps that have to go through the Texas Registry, the comment, then go on the commission's agenda and stuff. So it seems like September 1 is always a good date in the state of Texas for adoption of stuff. So I think what I'm hearing is the board may have a motion. Nancy, have a comment? Go
I
ahead.
just have a question. This is Nancy Crumley. When did you say that this would actually pass through commission? What's the gap between that and September 1st?
Well, this would be going to a commission meeting that's meeting in the month of September. I'm not sure the exact date. So, and then once the commission votes to adopt these rules, then that adoption notice has to be published in the Texas Register, and there has to be 20 days after that before it can take effect. So it wouldn't be September 1. I'm thinking more like November 1.
I was going to ask if there's a compromise date that moves it up quite a bit, but still falls within the time frame that's needed to get it through the process. So November, December, January, whatever that looks like.
So Molly, if I can, excuse me, Carla James, TDLR, we're certainly open to moving that date up. I know that there has been some discussion in our office about that future date, but we're hearing what you're saying, and I think that our executive office can visit with our general counsel office and Jim and his staff and determine a sooner date to get this done. So it certainly won't happen in June. I'll work with Molly to see when we can get it taken care of, get it in front of the commission, probably in late October, early November timeframe.
That works.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Then would not it be an appropriate motion from the board to accept all the recommendations from TDLR for all the changes, so that the process of getting it published in the Texas Register can begin, the waiting for the comments can get started right away, and leave the actual effective date to wait until we hear back from them when they can do that? Because I still think, based on what I've heard today, if we, as a board, say, we agree with this and we wanted to move forward and get published and start going, we could still make a September 1st date if we didn't have too many comments. Now, if we get a comment, you got to deal with them, and there are some subsequent changes, that obviously changes stuff.
And
But
Mr. Taylor,
September 1st is readily achievable.
Carla James, TDLR again. Mr. Taylor, I'm sure your time with our agency, you're aware of all the times and dates that we have to comply with, and when the commission is ready to meet, and we have that scheduled. So we will certainly move towards a quicker date, but I cannot make a promise of a September date at this time.
Well, I don't think anybody's asking for that. I'm certainly not, but,
Earliest possible date.
ASAP.
Yeah.
right, well, so moved then.
Yeah, again, is that from a motion standpoint, legal people, you know, yeah, help us frame that, if you would, then. As soon as possible, is that an acceptable motion?
I think it is. You can say in your motion that you leave it up to staff, but your recommendation is as soon as possible.
Okay. All right, well, again, we already voted on all the changes, so that part was already done. We already told them go publish to the registry. Now we're talking about the date. So is there any more comments or discussion regarding the effective date? All right, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lawrence Taylor. I would move that we accept all the recommendations from the elevator division, and that TDLR be encouraged to get the process moving and adopt it as soon as possible.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a second. All in favor? John
Aye.
McGraw. John McGraw seconded. All in favor, aye? Any opposition? No? All right, so we're approved.
I have one question.
Go forward.
Jim Renan, Chief Elevator Inspector. Would the board like me to send them, since I didn't have your copies of all the revised sections of the code, would you like me to email those to you so you'll have it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please. Not for me, thank you.
Okay.
All right.
You can send them to Lawrence for correction.
Okay, thank you, Molly and Jim. Item H on the agenda, recommendation for agenda items for next board meeting. So anybody have any burning issues or items to bring forth?
Well,
other than that?
This is Lawrence again. If I'm not mistaken, part of this process, once at a proposed effective date, we'd have to have another board meeting in order to approve that, right? Okay.
And to review, Mary Winston, any public comments. that-
Right, and any
Yes.
public comments, that's right. So, I don't see that, I would like to add that to the next agenda if we have a meeting prior to its adoption.
Yeah, it's good point.
Add what?
Just this entire discussion about the adoption of the 2016 code.
Right, okay. All right. Any other recommendations from the board for future agenda items? All right. Nothing? Okay. Then we'll go to item I, discussion of date, time, and location of upcoming board meeting.
Mr. Chairman, we've got 3 possible dates for you here in August, all on a Wednesday, August 1st, August 8th, August 22nd.
This is Lawrence. I like August 1st myself, but that's just me.
Okay. Of those 3 dates, any objection at this time from any of the members?
No objection for any of those for me.
Okay.
1 second.
Nancy Crowther, I have a preference for August 1st. Seems to be the only day I'm open.
And I usually take vacation that last week of August, so if you have it on the 22nd, maybe you do that on purpose, so I'm not here. But just in case.
Never, never. Mr. Taylor, we didn't know your vacation schedule. Thank you for letting us know.
Or is it hunting season? It's always an
Well,
issue
that's
with-
the vacation.
Okay. Any objection to August 1st then?
No.
No? Excellent, okay.
10:30 a.m.?
Yes, sir.
Keep it at that time, or it's up to you guys? Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Well, very good. That was the easiest next meeting that we've ever established. That's excellent. Okay. Again, thank you all very much for being here and watching. It is nice that we have a full board again. So even though we had a couple of members out, so I appreciate TDLR's effort to contact people or all the notifications they did to get people assigned. And Nancy Crowther, thank you for being here. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hey, pass that down.
My
Nancy.
honor.
Okay. All right. Then if there's no other discussion comment, then we will adjourn the meeting, 12:18 or so. Thank you very much.
That's for Nancy.
Oh,